Manager forced me to use a PTO to hit 40 hours after they sent me home due to low workload. Title basically says it. On Wednesday of last week we had a slow day and there wasn't enough work to go around. They asked if people would be willing to go home early, under the idea that you would not be paid for the time that was missed. A bit dumb, but I take one for the team and offer to go home. End of the week comes and my manager says my timesheet doesn't equal 40 hours. It's because you sent me home. He says I need to use my PTO to equal the difference even though they asked us to volunteer to go home. I said I never agreed to use PTO for this and he responds with "you volunteered. Is there anything I can do about this?" I eventually relented due to having my timesheet basically being held hostage. I have the correspondence saved. They sent you home. That's not PTO. What's next? Using PTO to have a weekend. PTO equals paid time off. This was unpaid leave. Unless you are trying to maintain your normal 40 hours paycheck, you shouldn't have to use PTO for being sent home due to lack of work. I'd send an email, while on the clock, noting that you would have never volunteered to go early had you known you would be forced to use PTO. You would rather go without pay for those hours. Then start working on quiet quitting. If they write you back and say, "Sorry, yeah, you have to use your PTO," then reply, "Good to know for future. Will never volunteer again to avoid risk of inadvertent negative effect to myself." Obviously not cool. The only good that possibly came from this is you might want to start looking for new job and you have to use or lose your PTO. So ironically may work out in your benefit to make sure you burn through that before leaving. Just keep saying no. Do you have an email asking for volunteers to leave early? Sorry, but in every single US state there are no protections that allow you to choose or not choose to use PTO. The only protections exist are the ones dictating if you get PTO and whether the employer has to pay you your PTO when you leave employment. In the 5 states you have those PTO protections. Employers are actually incentivized to force you to use up as much PTO as possible to prevent banking PTO so you get paid when you leave. I work in MA, which has the second best PTO laws after CA, and my company forces us to use PTO for every single non-working day. They closed the company for the entire week of July 4th. Literally the building was locked and no one was allowed to come in. And we had to use PTO for the 4 other days that weren't our covered holiday pay. PTO in this country is a joke and we all deserve better. I'd ask an employment lawyer on this one. But I don't see how he could force you to use your PTO if he also admits he sent you home. While yes, you did volunteer, he approved the request without any statement you would need to use your PTO. This feels like a bait and switch of sorts. They've shown you who they are now. Never volunteer for anything ever again. Also show them what the phrase, "quiet quitting," means. I know that in Germany that's illegal. You offered your work. If your boss doesn't have enough and sends you home, he still needs to pay for the full day you would have worked. Sounds like the thing to ask a union lawyer about for help. If you want to fight it, you stick firm. Say that no. This was agreed as unpaid time off with you only being paid for the hours that you worked. Not that you agreed to take PTO, and then try to sue them for the difference if they refuse. Reality is that fighting it can often lead to bigger problems than just rolling over and taking it. So, tricky decision. When to fight, when to take the L. Common practice in hospitals. First they ask for volunteers. Sounds like you volunteered, though without knowledge of the process. Volunteers have to use PTO to make up for the time off. If no one volunteers, Then someone is mandated to take off and they can then have unpaid time off. Doesn't have to come from their PTO bank. There's nothing illegal here or out of normal. All places I've worked required PTO use for absences. There is no right for PTO on the federal level. So if they do offer PTO, they can set conditions on how to use it. Now, what you can do is read the company policy to confirm it is indeed mandatory PTO use. Wish there were more protections or mandatory minimums for time off, but there aren't. One easy solution. The next day there is good weather. Take an unpaid day off. It would basically balance out. The PTO day is gone now. So take it back. If he says anything, tell him it would have been a PTO day but he used it on you already. Check the laws in your state. But I think a company can force you to use PTO. I think it's because there are no or few laws that cover PTO. I am sick of PTO as a concept. How about you just pay us enough to afford to not have to be paid for every single possible work hour in the year? As a manager, whenever we are slow we ask, take volunteers to leave early. Whoever agrees goes home and whatever on their time card at the end of payroll is it stays. If an employee requests to add PTO to get them to 40 hours, I would do it, but only if they ask. This is of poor taste from your manager and either an asshole or inexperienced. Are you technically in a salaried position? If not, why would they care if you evened out to 40 hours? Welcome to nursing in the USA. It sucks. I never understood the Personnic side of 40 hours. If you don't work 40, you don't get paid 40. Most states have 32 hours or above as full-time. As long as you are hitting that number, it should not affect your benefits. I work for a big multinational. If I want to take a day off unpaid, nobody cares but me. I worked, briefly, for a company in New Jersey that made hourly employees use PTO for snow days the business closed for acts of God, but still paid as salaries folks in full. NJDOBI considered it legal and legitimate. It probably depends on where you are and if you are hourly or salary. If you're hourly, and you want your 40 hours, you probably need to use PTO. If you're salary, some states say if you've worked at all for the day, you're entitled to the full day's pay. Either way, they should have explained it to you. Next time don't volunteer to go home early.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.